All aboard! Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, football fans of all ages, I am Beast Mikey. You have now arrived at my train of thought. It's time to, once again, and for the final time this year, ask the question, where do we go from here? One final division. It is the NFC East. A lot happened here. Some good, some bad, and then the Giants. Speaking of which, that's where I begin. And we probably should have known that things might have gone really bad when Joe Shane was caught on camera during Hard Knocks in the summer doing two things wrong. The first of which, not taking his son's advice and not trading up to get Jaden Daniels. I'll get to more on that later. The second of which was hoping that Saquon Barkley didn't sign with the Eagles, thinking that this was going to be a bad thing and he was going to rip the league up. He ripped the league up when he signed with the Eagles. More on that later. There's a reason why this division is going last. Anyway, the Giants season, once it actually started, was actually bad, but we expected it. We expected the Giants to be towards the bottom in the league, and they were. They were awful. And we should have known this from probably, I would say, week 3 is when things started to go kind of bad, and week 3 is where they started to lose and lose and lose and then lose again. Over and over again, with every beatdown, there was a goal that was starting to form. If they kept losing, they would get the number 1 overall pick. And suddenly, everything can change. They can get their quarterback, no fuss, no muss, and they can move forward. As it turns out, they get to the penultimate game of the year against the Colts, and all they needed to do was lose to Indy, and they would have the number 1 pick pretty much wrapped up because the Eagles were the next opponent. Saquon or not, we all figured the Eagles were going to beat the Giants. They somehow got a career day out of Drew Lock, and they did not get the first overall pick. Drew Lock and the Giants scored 45 points on the Colts in maybe the most shocking win of the year, and probably the most costly win of the year outside of the Patriots beating the Bills week 18. Ramifications I will get to later, but the Giants as a whole I'll get to now. Saquon Barkley's replacements, Tyrone Tracy, actually didn't do a bad job. He was actually pretty solid. He fumbled a couple times, but running backs will do that. He was generally a solid piece. They thought Devin Singletary could be the guy to be the RB1, but Tracy turned out to be the better pick and almost doubled him in yards. It was impressive on his part. Malik Neighbors, who they ended up picking instead of Michael Penix, Bo Nix, or J.J. McCarthy, actually balled out and played tremendously well. 1,200 yards. He didn't even play all 17 games. He was tremendous pretty much the entire season when he played. And they've got a number 1 receiver, New York does. They need a lot of other things, but they've got a number 1 receiver. That's good. They got something with Kayvon Thibodeau, obviously. Brian Burns is a very good defensive end. And Dexter Lawrence, excellent defensive tackle. They've got some pieces, just nowhere near enough pieces to keep up with a lot of the teams in the NFL, and especially the NFC East, which is suddenly ridiculous all over again. So what do I mean by this when it comes to the Giants statistically? As a team, the Giants were bad. Let's say that. They were 30th in total yards, 4. They, third to last there. They were, in terms of the passing game, they were 5th worst in the league. And surprisingly, there's a team here that I'm actually kind of stunned is here, but I'll get to that later. They're 5th worst there. And in terms of running the ball, below average. They weren't the worst in the league. They were actually below average. And a lot of that being because of Tracy handling business. And points-wise, one would expect the Giants to be towards the bottom. Not the worst, because I've already explained that with Cleveland. They were the worst in the NFC. So I guess that works. I explained so many things. They could not score. It was just no bueno. Daniel Jones not even in Giant anymore. It's been so long ago that Daniel Jones has been on 2 different teams since because he signed with the Colts. Now let's get to the defense. And the defense wasn't that great either, despite some pieces on it. 9th worst in terms of total yards, which is, again, that makes sense. The pass defense was actually good. Top 10 version. So you already know what's coming because they were 8th in terms of pass defense. You already know what's coming. The rush defense is going to be really, really bad. And it really, really was. It was the 6th worst in the league. So despite having Dexter Lawrence and Thibodeau and Burns, it was no bueno otherwise. We could get to the points allowed defensively, and honestly, better than I expected. I thought it'd be in the bottom 10. It's actually only 12th worst, so a little bit better than I expected. At least, I guess there's something for Big Blue, if you will. So let's get to where the Giants stand when it comes to their salary cap space. They're right in the middle of the league. They are 16th as of this moment in time at $31.8 million in space. So there's plenty of damage that they could do if they choose to do it. The Giants have already made some big moves, the biggest of which probably being Javon Holland to help out their safety room. Holland, I will say, as a Dolphins fan, is a good safety. He had very good years. This first three, last year wasn't up to his standard, up to par. It wasn't a good year by Holland's capabilities and talents. I do think Holland can get back to what he was in years 1 through 3, especially years 2 and 3, where Holland was really at his best in those years. But he will go there, and he'll go to New York, and we'll see what he is capable of there. Joining him in the secondary as a new addition is Paulson Adebo, who I think is a good player, though he did have the injury last year in New Orleans. I think Adebo can recover and bounce back. The real question is, who will be the quarterback in New York? Will it be Aaron Rodgers? Will it be Russell Wilson? Will they draft one? Speaking of which, the Giants, as I've mentioned, were punished for actually winning a game against the Colts. The punishment could have been slipping from pick 1 to pick 4. Instead, New England let them off the hook a little bit, and now they're only going to be pick 3. After said 3rd overall pick, they have picks in every round but the 6th. They have 2 picks in round 3, one's a compensatory, and they also have the 5th round pick they have is Seattle's, and they have 2 7th-round picks. One of those picks are Buffalo's. The Giants are a long way to go. It's clear that they're a long way to go, and it feels like a sink or swim year for Brian Daboll. Does Daboll get anywhere close to returning to the playoffs? And if he doesn't, does he get fired? It feels like it's inevitable that he would if they are not playing an 18th game. I think the Packers broke the Cowboys. There's no other way to say this. Dallas has not recovered from the beating that they took on the playoff game that they had with Green Bay last January. After said beating, the Cowboys went on kind of an odyssey to win even a home game, which is shocking considering Dallas, going into said playoff game, didn't lose at home for what felt like 2 years. They were that good on their home field at AT&T Stadium. The Cowboys, it's just weird to see Dallas with all that talent not do that well. And some of that may be because Dak Prescott got hurt, sure. But it was just weird to see them just underperform and underachieve this way. Now, many haters enjoyed this. Many haters were celebrating and laughing at the demise of the Cowboys for the 24 season. But it was just weird to see it considering all their talent on that roster. Things were down bad. Like, Dallas didn't get a home win until, I believe, Thanksgiving. And that's how rough things were for Dallas. It took beating the Giants to get it. And they always beat the Giants. So did they really get a home win? Well, other than Tampa Bay, I guess. Anyway, the Cowboys struggled very badly after Dak got hurt, and I think we can stop the Cooper Rush being better than Dak Prescott slander. They do obviously have CeeDee Lamb, who obviously his statistics went down, and it just wasn't anywhere near as good as what it needed to be. Rico Dotto was okay. He did have 1,000 yards, but it just didn't feel like the Cowboys that we were expecting to see. Rico Dotto's now gone, by the way. I'll get into what Dallas did to replace him in a moment. The Cowboys were, I would say, average or slightly above it when it came to total yards per game, which, okay, fine, considering where they were. Passing-wise, they were actually in the top 10, believe it or not. And actually 11th. They were 11th in passing offense. No, still pretty good. Still good. Now, the rushing game had struggled for a good amount of the year, and it showed. They were bottom 6th in the league. They were the 6th worst in the league in terms of actually running the football. So that actually checks out. When it came to actually scoring, they were slightly below average, which, again, I would consider that checking out pretty well. Defensively, you already know the names to some degree. Micah Parsons having another very good year individually. DeMarcus Lawrence, who's now gone. I'll mention that in a little bit. And I'd say the breakout star was DeMario Overshown. He was outstanding for the majority of this year, making plays all over the place. He was stopping the run pretty well, and he was getting to the quarterback pretty well. He had that pick 6 on Thanksgiving against the Giants, and then unfortunately, he blew up his knee, and now he's probably done for this season too. It was a heartbreaking loss to see DeMario Overshown go down because he was a really good player, and I believe it's his second year coming out of Texas. He was a really good piece that Dallas had. It could have built around with Micah, to be honest. Defensively speaking, the Cowboys were at times not very good. They were shredded in decent amounts at different intervals this year. 5th worst in terms of actually stopping teams from getting yards in the league, which is not great. They were passing wise. Had cornerbacks get NOs in back-to-back years. And this was not that, as Deron Bland and Trevion Diggs had some injury issues for most of the year. The Cowboys were, I would say, below average. Nothing too awful, but below average in terms of actually stopping people against the pass, or at average more so, I would say, considering at average totals. Now, run game, defensively, they were trash. Believe it or not the worst in this division. I'll get to that team in a little bit. And they were the 4th worst team in the league when it came to stopping the run. It showed in games like the Baltimore game because Derrick Henry went completely insane against them. Giving up points, they gave up a bunch of them. And they were actually 31st, which is a bit of a stunner considering how bad some of these other teams were. They were 31st in the league in terms of giving up points. Carolina was the only team worse than them. And that is actually stunning. But then again, they gave up 40 pieces a couple times this year. They gave up 30 a bunch of other times this year. So, yeah, the defense getting shredded it tracks. It actually does pretty much track here. Cap space wise, the Cowboys are actually in the top 10. So if Jerry Jones wanted to actually go all in, unlike last year, he could actually conceivably do it. They have $46.9 million in cap, so slightly behind the Raiders. And it looks like it puts them ninth in terms of cap. It does. It puts them ninth in terms of their cap space. The Cowboys have been somewhat active in free agency. They got Javonte Williams at running back, who I think is going to help their situation out pretty well. I do like his thunder style that he brings, and I think he's going to help out. In some cases, he'll have to help out with Kevondre Turpin as a wide receiver 2, and of course, CeeDee Lamb as a wide receiver 1. There is a major hole in that offensive line that Robert Jones, coming from Miami, is going to have to patch up. Zach Martin is going to go to the Hall of Fame in 5 years. He decided to retire this year, and the hole that he leaves behind is going to be rather sizable. We'll see if Dallas can fill that hole nicely with Robert Jones or the draft pick. Tank Lawrence is going to Seattle, which it just seems weird because he felt like a Cowboys lifer, but he's going to go to Seattle and be along that defensive line, which against the run, they're really good. And they're also going to lose Rico Dowdle to the Panthers, so him and Chuba Hubbard, I think it's going to be a really good look there. So those are some things that Dallas did in this free agency. Them getting a wide receiver 2 would probably be good. Them fortifying the guard spot would probably be good. And the Cowboys just getting overall better play from their guys, getting Dak Prescott back healthy, I think would just genuinely be a solid thing. Let's get to the draft picks that the Cowboys have. And this is a team that gets laughed at a lot, sure, but they actually do draft pretty well when Stephen Jones is on his game. They pick 12th. And then they have their own draft picks in every round but the 7th. They have multiples thanks to and actually they don't have their own 4th round pick either. They have 2 5ths though. 3 5ths, I should say. A couple of them are compensatories. They have a 6th from Detroit, and they have another compensatory there, and they have a 7th from the Chiefs. So Dallas could probably flip 2 of those 5s and get into the 4th, and it's easy for them. The Cowboys are kind of in a sink or swim type year because they've waited so long in terms of paying Micah Parsons. They're going to have to fork over a whole lot of dough for Micah Parsons. Max Crosby got paid this offseason. Myles Garrett got paid this offseason. Those are people in the peer group and or the higher tier group than Micah is. The only other one that didn't get paid this offseason was Watt. He got paid last year. Micah Parsons is probably looking at his banker and saying this is going to be a good year. But will this be a good year for the Cowboys? The Dallas Cowboys were the last non-playoff team I'm going to cover in this series this year. How did the Commanders get here? Well, it's pretty simple. They hit the lottery. They were this year's Houston Texans in the sense of they got it right at coach, at quarterback, at GM, and an owner. They got it right. They hired Dan Quinn to bring some toughness and stability back to the coaching ranks. They drafted Jaden Daniels when the Bears decided to take Caleb Williams. And we all would have taken Caleb with the first overall pick. Let's not kid ourselves. They then promptly got the ownership is right with Josh Harris instead of Dan Snyder. So they've got that part going for them. And then Jaden Daniels gets on the field and he looks composed and ready to work and absolutely shred everything before him, which he kind of sort of did. The Hail Mary is where their season flipped. It's where the Bears season flipped. Everything changed for both those teams, and Jaden Daniels took that squad on the magic carpet ride. It went from nice story to, oh, they're actually good, I would say, with that Hail Mary, because he outdueled Joe Burrow, Daniels did, and it was amazing to see that, but I don't think anyone took them seriously after week 2. We all took them seriously after the Hail Mary, I think. Sure, the Commanders had their struggles and they had their negative points, but considering this wasn't supposed to be as good as it was, where that team would actually go win 2 playoff games, one in Tampa Bay, and then to get their lick back from week 1, and then one in Detroit where nobody thought they'd actually win, and they did it by 2 scores, and a suspect defense showed up and showed out. There's no shame in anything that happened from there. They got rolled by the Eagles, sure, but the Eagles basically had a Super Saiyan running back. I'll explain that in a little bit. Obviously, the Commanders' offense was high tier because Jaden Daniels was excellent, and Terry McLaurin was really good and finally got his flowers. And they got good production from the likes of Zach Ertz and Noah Brown, and they were generally just really good and well-rounded. Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler were decent at running backs. They didn't outrun Jaden Daniels. Daniels had the most rushing yards here, but they were still just a really good team. Zacchaeus came on real strong down the stretch. It was just a good setup, a good amount of pieces that just did their part, and they worked out swimmingly for this Commanders team. This is why this Commanders offense was top 10. They finished 7th overall in total offense. They, in terms of passing offense, were slightly below average, believe it or not. But their rushing attack was where their bread was buttered. They finished 3rd along not only in the NFL, but 3rd amongst the Acela line. I will explain who finished 2nd in a moment. Anyway, points-wise, they scored a lot of them. They were the 5th best at it. 2nd best amongst the Acela line, by the way. But they were 5th best in terms of points scored. They put up points in bunches and basically made you score with them. Not many teams could. Defensively, I would say it was kind of sort of the fly in the ointment here, you would think. Their total defense was actually hovering around the top 10. It was actually above average, so not bad. Not bad there. Pass defense-wise, believe it or not, the Commanders were actually pretty good. The Marshall Lattimore trade didn't work out so well, but they were actually pretty good against the pass, finishing 3rd. 2nd best amongst the Acela line. I'll explain who was first later. The run defense, however, was not so great, and it is kind of where things went south for the Commanders. And part of that was the injury to Jonathan Allen, and he's gone now. They were 30th, so 3rd to worst, so kind of evens out. 3rd best passing, 3rd worst rushing defense. Kind of evens out. Good work there. Now, points-wise, the Commanders were great at scoring them. Were they great at not giving them up? They were average. So, I guess you take that with that kind of offense. Now we can get to where they've been incredibly busy. This would be their free agency. They are hovering around the top 10 in terms of their salary cap space. They're actually 15th, believe it or not. 14th at $32.5 million. They were amongst the league leaders in terms of cap space when this free agency tampering period started, and they have wasted no time in going to work on it. They traded for Deebo Samuel, who absolutely will become a nightmare with Terry McLaurin. They traded for Laremy Tunsil to give Jaden Daniels that blindside protector that he's going to sorely need. So Washington's making sure that they're going to take advantage of this free contract that they have. Not free, but rookie deal that they have with Daniels. Good decision-making here. Marshall Lattimore was not great coming over from the Orleans, but we'll see what Lattimore can do in his first full offseason in D.C. or Landover, Maryland, where that stadium is. I've been there. It's only mid. Anyway, or actually, it's really not that good, to be honest, compared to other stadiums. Anyway, they got Javon Kinlaw to play Jonathan Allen, and we'll see what the Commanders can do now that everybody sees them coming, as opposed to, oh, they were only a nice story turned into a really good team. And Jaden Daniels, how does he follow up what was probably the greatest QB rookie season of all time, considering how great he was in the regular season and how he ended up winning 2 playoff games with the Commanders in his first go-round. Very impressive work. Draft-wise, they're not going to be very busy. They have their pick at 29, and then they have their own pick in rounds 2, 6, and 7. They've got a 4th-round pick as part of that Tunsil deal with Houston in round 4. So obviously no 3s or 5s, and they don't have too many draft picks to begin with, only 5. So Washington clearly said we're gonna go for it in terms of spending money in free agency, and then we'll go from there with the first draft picks, with the draft picks and all that. Maybe Washington could use help with Sandra Still in the secondary. Sandra Still actually played pretty well down the stretch. Maybe getting him some help there in terms of the cornerback spot. Younger pieces to help Lattimore out that would also probably be pretty solid. But this is genuinely a good roster. It's coached pretty well by Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury. And Jaden Daniels obviously played well, and they've already improved the receiver and the offensive line rooms. So Washington may just be getting started here, and that's going to be really bad for a few years because Jaden Daniels is still on that rookie deal. But the team that ended their season is the team that everybody is chasing. The world champions, the Philadelphia Eagles, who crushed many challenges before them, and we probably should have seen that this was going to be a really good year for them after they signed Saquon Barkley in the offseason, making all of Joe Shane's nightmares come true. Barkley showed himself to be as advertised pretty much the entire way through. Just the 9th player to ever go over 2,000, and he could have broke the rushing record against the Giants and chose not to. They chose to not allow it to happen, which probably saved the Giants some more humiliation, though I think the rest of us would have wanted to see it. Instead, what we got was Saquon Barkley going God mode in the playoffs, going absolute scorched earth against the Packers, really scorched earth against the Rams for the second time. He had 2 200-yard games against the Rams. That was wild. And then he dominated the Commanders for a 3rd time this year. And in the Super Bowl, he didn't have to do the damage. Instead, it was the defense that did it. The defense causing crazy amounts of turnovers and pressure for Pat Mahomes, where there was nowhere for him to go. And then Jalen Hurts did the rest with his arm, not his legs. As Kansas City did what we all would have done. Stop 26. Unfortunately, there was no answer for Hurts. Not great. And flies against the narrative. Jalen Hurts had a very good Super Bowl. Now, do I think he's a top-tier NFL passer? I don't. But I do think Jalen Hurts is a capable one. He's a solid one if you give him the proper pieces. They have a super team. They gave him the proper pieces. Let's talk about where the Eagles are. In terms of their total yardage output, they were right behind the Commanders, which is saying something considering how well they ran the ball. They were 8th in terms of actually producing yards. Now, passing is where it's a little interesting for the Eagles. They were towards the bottom and were 4th from the bottom, but you didn't really have to do that because you had Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts running the football and the brotherly shove, which everybody hates. Said brotherly shove and Barkley and Hurts and whatnot put the Eagles 2nd in terms of actually running the football. Only the Ravens did better. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson will do that. But you have the combination here of 3 mobile quarterbacks, Lamar and Hurts and Daniels, and then a running game behind them that can also get busy. Saquon Barkley running for 2K is quite nice. As for the point totals that they put up, the Eagles were 7th in terms of points for. They did work there. It was just a lot of scoring for the Eagles from a lot of different pieces. Yes, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith got in where they fit in. Not as much Goddard. Goddard had injury issues. But those two, Brown and Smitty, got where they needed to get because they're just really good receivers. Dallas Goedert, will he be back? Rumors are they may trade him. We'll see. Goddard, I think, is a good tight end. He just had a really rough year when it came to injuries. Defensively speaking, this unit was an absolute wall, and it was absolutely ridiculous. Vic Fangio did what he needed to do. He cultivated this unit and didn't really have too many injury issues on it. A great mix of youth and experience. From the experience led by, of course, Brandon Graham and Darius Slay and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, to the youth that are the Georgia boys up front, Jordan Davis, and especially Jalen Carter. Reed Blankenship, who's a very good safety, I think. And then, of course, the two rookies on the outside when it came to Quinion Mitchell as their first round pick from last year, and Cooper DeJean, who's emerged as a really good nickel corner / safety, who obviously had that pick 6 in the Super Bowl. And then there's Zach Bond, who came from New Orleans and was kind of a cast-off from them. And he didn't really do much of anything in New Orleans. Like, he was only kind of a meh player. He then becomes an all-pro and becomes amazing at pretty much everything he did. Re-signing him was a vital decision to make. I'll explain if they made it later. The Eagles as a unit were absolutely ridiculous. They were the best defense in football, pretty much from bell to bell. Number 1 in terms of yards allowed. They were that good. They also were number 1 against the pass in terms of yards allowed. Also really good. They were slacking in terms of rushing yards allowed. That's disappointing. They were only 10th in that part. They slacked heavy in terms of giving up the rushing yards. Only 10th. Yeah, what's wrong with you people? Anyway, the Eagles were really good, and so good they were second in allowing points. So you could tell the Eagles were really, really good at stopping you and frustrating you with their defense. We're going to get to the cap space now, and Howie Roseman has shown himself to be really good at managing the cap over the years for various reasons. Some of which to reload before he has to, some of which to re-up when he has to, and some of which to make other moves, which I'll explain. The Eagles are towards the bottom in terms of cap space, and they are 13th worst at it, with $27.5 million in cap space, right below the Chiefs and above the Ohio teams, amongst others. But they're 13th worst in terms of cap space, they've been active in free agency. Zach Bond, they gave him the deal that he deserved. That was a very good decision, nice move to make sure that he was taken care of. They released Darius Slay and are going to go young, and this is becoming a theme with the Eagles defense. They released Slay, he's already gone to Pittsburgh. They decided not to keep Josh Sweat, he's already gone to Arizona. Williams took a heavy payday in New England. He's going to get over $100 million in his contract. And CJ Gardner-Johnson, they decided to trade him, and he was shocked by it. They traded him to Houston to get a piece that will, ideally for them, help out the situation going forward. They got left guard Kenyon Green, who has kind of sort of struggled since he was drafted a few years ago. And it kind of comes full circle because the Kenyon Green pick was who Houston traded down with the Eagles for the Eagles to get Jordan Davis. Kenyon Green ended up becoming the pick that Houston took a few picks after the Eagles took Jordan Davis. So it kind of comes full circle there. Gardner-Johnson is going to go to Houston and be a part of what could be a really nasty defensive secondary down in Houston. So that's 4 starters not on this Eagles defense, and probably a 5th starter on this team in general, with Mekhi Becton probably going elsewhere as Kenyon Green more than likely replaces him at the right guard spot. So that's really where the Eagles free agency is. They don't have too many needs except for just get more talent. Nolan Smith obviously has got to step up instead of Josh Sweat, and he had a breakout season, so maybe he is capable of doing that. Brandon Graham, what happens with him? Does he retire? Does he come back? Obviously, he's an Eagles lifer. I would think he'd return, but if he went out on top, it would make sense. It would make sense. He got 2 rings and is easily an Eagles Hall of Famer, unquestionably, and I'm not sure he should have to wait the waiting period they may have down at the link. But yeah, he should absolutely, if he wants to retire, I think everybody would understand because he got his 2nd ring. The Eagles will obviously be picking 32nd, and they have their own picks in the first 4 rounds. Houston's 5th because they got that back in the Gardner-Johnson trade. They have the Lions 5th. They have the Commanders 5th. And they have their own 5th or a 5th compensatory. They have no other picks after round 5. They will probably have a lot of arrogance from a lot of their fans. But anyway, the Eagles are in a really good spot. A mix of a whole lot of talent and a whole lot of youth and some very good coaching from Vic Fangio especially. And they are the kings of the roost right now. They're the ones atop the nest with another banner that will be at Lincoln Financial Field in September. So there you have it. That's the NFC East, and that's all 32 teams. This will conclude the series as we find out where each NFL team goes from here. The next video I'm going to do will be the NBA Power Rankings, getting back into the power ranking mode. Look out for that either tonight or tomorrow night. And Washington, though you were the next to last stop on this train of thought, you'll be the first stop on my next train of thought.